We're moving on to item 4.1, board report, information and reports on the state of the system report. I'd like to recognize Chancellor Harris.
Thank you, President Baum, members of the board. I want to set the stage for this conversation. In front of you, you have the actual printed report, which is the sort of glossy version of some of the information that I will go over, and I would recommend that to your review at some point in the future. I've been at the board table for about 25 years of my career, and as you can imagine, I've made numerous board reports, and I don't believe that it is an understatement to tell you that this one may, in fact, be the most important board report that I have made in my career, because what I'm about to talk with you about is, I think, nothing short of remarkable in terms of what you as a board have done and how this system has responded. I would remind you that what I'm going to do today is report to you on the outcomes of the 12, 13, 14 outcomes on the achievements of the system measured against the goals that you set in July of 2014. So you'll recall that you set those goals in 2014, and I'll go into detail in a moment on what those are. And then that the report on the progress at the end of the first year came to us within the last month or two. And so now you're going to hear how the system is doing against the goals that you set about 18 months ago. I would remind you that those goals came as a result of a variety of things. First was the task force that you commissioned on student success. And following that, the Lieu bill, which was the legislative enactor of many of the recommendations that were in the student success task force. And then in the 14-15 budget year, the first year that the legislature and the governor really significantly funded this work, there was trailer bill language in there that suggested that we develop system-wide goals and that ultimately those be developed at the local level. And so you will recall that in July of 2014, we came forward to you with 9 metrics that we recommended you set goals on. And we went into, both in a retreat and ultimately in a public meeting in much more detail, those metrics. And the first 4 of those 9 had to do with student success. And we'll talk about what these are as we go through them. The second area was equity, and so metric number 9, we'll talk about completion rate among the disaggregated student body by race and ethnicity. And then the third area was in student services, and this is where you set a goal for the number of our students that have education plans. And as you know, one of the recommendations in the Student Success Task Force was for us to implement a system of statewide automated education planning that would allow students to better manage their pathway to degree and transfer themselves and free up our counselors to spend more time counseling and less time doing paperwork. The seventh metric was one of efficiency, and this is a word those of us in higher education tend to shy away from. We don't like the term efficiency, but obviously when we are having significant investments by the state of California, the state, the administration, the legislature, the Department of Finance want to know that those dollars are being well used, and so they do want to know what it's taking for us to achieve each outcome, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then the last area was one of access. And you'll recall a robust conversation, both in the retreat and in the meeting where you approved the goals, that suggested one of the things that we needed to be very, very careful of was that in our zeal to improve the success of our students, if what that meant was that in fact we shut students out of our colleges that were most educationally disadvantaged, that was not an acceptable outcome. So these are the 9 metrics on which I'm going to report over the next few minutes. And Let's take a look at those first three that involve student success. And again, the definition of the metric here is that the most important metric is the completion rate, and I would remind you those are the students that completed a degree or certificate or successful transfer. And we look at them in three buckets. One, the overall performance of our students. Secondly, those that were college students when they came to us, and you'll recall that that's only about a fourth of our students. 3/4 of them fall into the last category, and those are students that are underprepared when they arrive. And in light of that underprepared, then, the second metric there is remedial math and English rates. And so that, again, we'll report on specifically. And then finally are the performance of students in career tech education programs, the completion numbers for them. And so the goal in these three areas was to increase the cohort rates by 2.5% annually within their 6-year follow-up period. So let me remind you, this is not an easy target on which to focus. We are looking at cohorts over a 6-year period of time. So as you see at the top of that chart is the 7-8 cohort. We no longer can impact them because they have gone through that 6-year period of time. So if you look at those red X's out in the right-hand column, that is the group of students about which I'm going to report. And what that means is for the 08-09 cohort, we had only 1 year opportunity to impact them. For the 9-10, we'll report on 1 year, but we will be back next year to report on another year of those, and on down the list to the 13-14 cohort, which we will have 6 years or 5 more years to impact that cohort. And so I would remind all of us that making changes in the practices at the college, in the regulation and the rules that govern student success, unfortunately, can take a long time before you can see the impact of those changes because we measure these cohorts over a 6-year period of time. Now, let's go to the first one, and that is the completion rate overall. And remember, we're trying to improve that by 2.5% annually. And so what this shows you is that for the 08-09 cohort, we did not meet that goal. The goal was to get to 4.95 overall, and we were instead at 4.81. Again, in the 9-10 cohort, again looking at this year only, we did not meet that goal. However, when you go to 10-11, again, when we have more time to impact them, we did actually meet and in fact exceed the goal, and such was the case for 11-12 as well.
Chancellor, really quickly, are these slides supposed to be at our place, or?
They are at your place. They're in.
Okay.
They're in this, sorry about that.
Yes.
They're in this handout that says, whoops, I picked up the wrong one.
No. So so we don't have that.
Is that handout there? Yeah. Oh, okay. I apologize. I thought they were at your place.
So.
We'll get those for you. For now, you're going to have to follow
We weren't
along
sure
with
if
the
you were
video.
working off this.
They're not, no, they're not in that they're not in that document in this level of detail.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great.
Continue, please.
Okay. So let's now, from the overall, let's go to the two subcategories, the first being the unprepared category. And again, in that area, in 08-09 and in 9-10, we did not meet those goals because we only have, in the case of the first one, 1 year to impact them. In the case of the second one, we will have another year next year. And so certainly we hope that we'll see the completion numbers for the underprepared tick up. But it is really exciting to report that in both 10-11 and 11-12, we did meet the goals. So that means that the changes that we began making with our Student Success Initiative over the last 4 years, at least apparently according to this, are beginning to positively impact those cohorts. Again, you can see that we met or exceeded those goals that you set. Now, and finally, the completion numbers among the prepared, and remember that these are students who come as college students. They need no remediation whatsoever. But still, you set the goal to see those numbers improve by 2.5% annually. We did not meet that goal in either 8, 9, 9, 10, or 10, 11. However, again, in the 11, 12 cohort, where we will still have 4 more years to impact them, we did see that goal met.
I just want to understand the 2.5%. So in that same cohort, 2.5% more of them should have completed.
That is
So that
exactly right.
in the over 6 years, depending on where your starting point from that cohort is, what would be the completion rate?
You would go up by about 12 or 13. You would
Okay.
see about a 12 or 13% improvement if we meet this.
If you started with, which would be the 2011, 2012
That's correct.
cohort.
That's correct.
Okay.
It is a moving target, and in fact, you'll see in a moment where we're going to have to adjust some of the goals because we blew by them so fast.
I have a question too.
Yes.
What do the numbers mean? The raw numbers. They're much smaller for the early cohorts than the late cohorts.
Yes, they're smaller, Alice, because we don't have as much. In fact, Alice, you better come up.
Yeah, first of all, that number that you see is just that last percentage increase in that last year. So our cohorts, our completion rate is, I think, 48% or so. So this is just the last piece of it that you see. The reason why the other numbers are larger is because we do better with students that are in their 3rd or 4th year. By the time they get to their 6th year, the number get really small. And so that's why you're seeing 13%, 27%. So the bulk of our students, the completion happens in that 3rd year.
And we'll show you a chart in a moment that helps you see that better. Going on to remedial math, this is really tremendous news for us because, as you know, the building blocks for that underprepared group are the success in both remedial math and English. And as you can see, again, that goal was 2.5%. And we were able to exceed that in each of those years, as was the case with remedial English. And again, those are really positive suggestions about the future because every time we move a student from the unprepared to the prepared category, their overall success rate goes from about 40% to about 70%. Those are rough numbers, but you can imagine that if we're able to move them through this remediation series and to college level work, it really has a dramatic impact on their success. Now, the career tech education number, remember these reporting requirements are just coming online, and this was the first year that we had that metric, and so we had to go through a redefinition of that metric. And as a result of that, and one other case I'm going to show you in a minute, we don't have any results to report to you on the CTE completion rate. It went down, but we don't know that it went down because it went down or because we changed the definition. So you'll have an apples to apples comparison next year, but for now, we can't report this one to you. So now let's take a look at the volume of associate in arts and associate degree transfer degrees. And remember, this is the number of associate degrees for transfer that was awarded in each of the academic year. And the goal here was to improve that by 5% annually over the next 5 years. Now, this is the associate degree for transfer program that you authorized several years ago, but that we completed just in the last few months. In fact, you got the final report for that in September. These numbers are really remarkable. Again, we were trying, the purple numbers in the middle of the page show you what the goals would have been, and as you can see, we've already gotten in 13-14, which is the year this report's based on, 11,000 students. So that's a dramatic uptick, and in fact, as you know, in the report that you received on this program back in September, we had nearly 21,000 students in 14-15. So we're going to come forward to you with a reconstituting of these goals at some point in the future because we far exceeded them. And so you'll need to set new goals for us, or at least we'll need to re-bench them against the the dramatic increase. Now, these numbers still seem relatively small, measured against about 100,000 transfer students. But again, if 21,000 of them, only 3 years or 4 years into this program, chose that pathway for transfer, you can imagine why, you can understand why we believe this is going to be the acceptable pathway for transfer to the CSU in years to come. So again, this is very good news for us. The next one is the completion rates among subgroups. And I would remind all of you that you said to us, not only do we want to see overall completion improve, but we want to close performance gaps. And I would remind you that the goal you set was for us to move in a positive direction any group, any ethnic group that was 80% or below in terms of their performance. And so you can see here that in the case of our Pacific Islanders and our Hispanic students, they both exceeded that goal. So our goal here would be to have shown progress with our African American and our American Indian populations. And fortunately for us, in the case of one of those, they improved. We did see the African American numbers tick up slightly toward that 80%. Unfortunately, the American Indian and Alaskan Native numbers we did not succeed. Those numbers actually went down in the past year.
I'm sorry, Chancellor Harris. The marginal, the increment of improvement or lack of improvement is useful, but I think I would appreciate maybe in another date receiving the absolute numbers. Because what is the difference between 0.779 for African Americans and hitting 0.787? Like how many more were able to achieve parity, I guess would be the way to, that would be very helpful to us. It's because otherwise these are quite abstract. And given the volume and numbers of our students, we really need to be able to translate that way so we can communicate it effectively to people.
Absolutely. And we do have about 8% of our student body that's African American. We could run those numbers, but we'll get a table for you that shows you the absolute numbers, and those are available for all these statistics. Again, the other indicator we are unable yet to measure, and that is the percent of our students with an educational plan. Again, that technology is just now being ramped up to the entire system. We have tested it at a number of our colleges. It'll become live this year, and so unfortunately we can't report on that indicator yet. The numbers are obviously increasing because students are coming online, but it's unfair for us to take credit for improvement until we have that. We're able to measure that at all 113 of our colleges. The next goal area is that efficiency goal I talked with you about, and to shorthand this, it's basically how many courses are necessary to be offered before we get a successful student completion. Again, degree, certificate, or transfer. And so the goal here was to decrease the amount of courses we have to offer in order to achieve a successful completion. Unfortunately, the numbers here are not good. The way you get here, by the way, is taking the total amount of consumable courses that are generated in that scorecard report on successful and dividing it by the total number of folks or courses that we offered. And when you look at that, and this gets back to your question answered or asked earlier, Mr. Epstein, and that is this shows you when students tend to complete various things. So you'll see in the yellow bar, for example, that's the Associate in Arts or the Associate in Science degree. Obviously, in the first year a student is with us, very few of them will complete that associate's degree. Probably only the ones who were able to transfer in work from other colleges. But as you go forward, you see in the second and third and fourth years, that number goes up dramatically and then begins to tail off after that. So you notice that, for example, in the triangular rust-colored bar on the top, that transfer to four-year institutions. Remember, most of our students are with us part-time. Only less than a quarter of them are full-time students. So it takes them 3 or 4 years to prepare for transfer. And so you can see in that line at the top within the blue bars how many of them tend to transfer in year 3, year 4, and then they begin to drop off in year 5. When you look at the numbers, unfortunately, we did not become more efficient in that, in this particular report. In fact, we became less efficient. It actually took more courses offered in order to achieve those successful completions. Now, this is probably due to the fact that when the Great Recession ended, we were able to offer more courses. But again, it's going to take us more research to be able to tell you why this happened. But the bottom line is we did not achieve the goal that you set for us. Finally, in the area of access, a couple of rates regarding participation. And remember, you focused on the recent high school graduate, that 18 to 24 age college student, and the group here was to increase the participation rate each year. Now, you'll recall that during the Great Recession, we saw a dramatic downtick in the participation rate statewide because our colleges had to ration education. They literally had to take courses that students needed off the shelf, and students couldn't complete those degrees. So your goal was to see that turn around, and in fact, it did, only slightly, but we did see an uptick in the participation rate in that 18 to 24 age cohort, which is certainly encouraging, and this is a number we want to see grow even more in the very near future, especially if we, as we do, believe we'll see perhaps 3 million students in this system by 2025. We need to see this number trail up. I would remind you that you said it's not, again, enough simply to have an increase in participation rate. We don't want to leave any ethnic or groups behind in that process. And so you set goals, again, drilling down into the numbers on the participation rate by race and ethnicity. There were two groups that were below that 80% threshold, African American and Hispanic students. And what we see is that in this case, these are the overall numbers. During the Great Recession, you can see the dramatic drop-off in Asian students and in African American students and in white students. You see an increase during that time, which is really impressive, among our Hispanic students. But specifically to the groups that we were trying to make certain stayed above that 80%, the African American and our Hispanic students, we did see both of those successful. They stayed above 80%. However, you can see among our African American students that they slipped closer to the 80%. So although the goal was met, this is a trend that's certainly not good, and we'd want to see this turn around in the coming year. So when you look at this report, quickly in summary, we did see the completion rates for the more recent cohorts, the ones that we have a longer amount of time to see the impact of student success, those did improve. We did see those remedial math and English rates improving, which is really encouraging for us. We did see the number of associate degree for transfer numbers go up dramatically. This program, frankly, is far more successful, I think, than even any of us expected it to be. We saw equity in the completion rate increase for African Americans, but not for American Indian and Alaskan Native students. It did not meet the goal. We saw the efficiency goal that you set unmet. We did expect to see that improve, and it did not. We became less efficient rather than more. We saw that system-wide participation rate among those 18 to 24 student improve, and we also saw them all stay above that 80% threshold, but again, the participation rate for African American students dropped, which is certainly something that we have to be cognizant of. But I think, and this is the reason that I said to you when I sat down, this could be the most important board report I've ever made, and that is that what you don't see in this is the most important goal, which really was unwritten, and that is that you as a board are able to set goals for the largest system of higher education in the world, and within 18 months, the system is able to tell you how they're performing on those goals. Remember, a system of 72 locally elected districts and 113 colleges and 2 million students, and you've been able to set goals, and now here we are 18 months later being able to measure those. That is frankly, one of the most remarkable accomplishments I've seen in my career. And it's something of which all of you should be very proud. Obviously, we want to meet all the goals that you set, but the fact that you can set them and we can come and report to you on our progress is nothing short of phenomenal. With that, I'll be happy to try to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Chancellor, for sharing all the progress and then also being candid about the areas where we didn't meet our goals. I'd like to open it up to board members for questions or discussion. Member Alvarez?
Thanks. I'll start. Thank you, Chancellor. Great report. One of the things I want to get clarity on is, in your expertise, how long does it take for funds to actually funnel through the system to start seeing achievement, right? So if we look at last year's budget, right, where we had, one of the largest budgets that we put into the system in terms of money, do you feel like that money we put in the system is reflected in these numbers, or is it going to take another 6 months to a year, or what do you think that's going to change?
That's an excellent question. I would remind the board that over the last 3 years, the governor and the legislature invested $50 million first, and then $200 million last year, and another $200 million in the current year. So a total of $450 million and a roughly $8 billion budget over that period of time. It does take at least one full budget cycle and sometimes two to see those dollars impacting, for a couple of reasons. One is that the system, unfortunately, has been conditioned to be very cautious about spending money like this for ongoing expenses, because historically, the last money in the system was the first money out. And so when we had investments in Partnership for Excellence, for example, many, many years ago, when the budget downturn hit the state, they took that money out first. And so convincing our colleges that it is safe to use these dollars to hire more counselors and to put in more full-time faculty and do the kinds of things we know are going to have the long-term impact, that's not something you can do overnight. And so it probably does take 2 full budget cycles, and that's really where we are now. There certainly were some of the changes that you made in student success that didn't require money, and those really are probably the reason you're seeing some of these things begin to uptick. But we are such a huge system, it does take some time to see those investments begin to pay off. And as you recall, when we're tracking these students over a 6-year period of time, even if you make a modest improvement in year 1, you still have the potential to see those improvements uptick if they do what you've asked, 2.5% per year. They really have the potential to dramatically see the numbers move over time.
Okay. Yeah, because when I look at the statewide Student Success Scorecard 2015, what I did notice year over year is actually a 1.4% drop in completion. So, and I think, so I'm just wondering about that, right? And specifically when we look at African Americans and Latinos, there was a drop of about 0.8%, Latinos and African Americans at 0.9%. So we are seeing that the completion rates are actually dropping, not increasing, and that's why I asked the question.
And that's a fabulous question. In fact, if you look in the printed report, you see those overall numbers, and as Member Avalos points out, they are down for completion and for CTE completion in both those categories. And again, the rationing of education that we undertook during the Great Recession dramatically delayed many of our students' pathway to transfer, degree, and certificate completion. And again, we haven't been able yet to conduct the research to prove that to be a causal relationship. But this is frankly is hard to say, but I'm less concerned about those longer-term numbers than I am with these ones that we've given you today, because these are the ones that are forward-looking and will tell you what you should expect from cohorts coming forward. But you're absolutely right. Those numbers are still, we've seen the building blocks, the course success rates, the remedial education, in math and English as a second language. We've seen all of those tick up, but we have not yet seen that alpha metric, or the one that's the most important to us, the completion metric, start up for the system.
Thank you.
I had a question, just really quickly on the associate degrees for transfer. The first year was about 5,000, then we bumped up to 11,000. We're clearly exceeding the the incremental increase of 5%. And we're almost going to an exponential increase. And I know that Cal State has some anxiety about absorbing that number. Do we have any early indication what the 14-15 numbers are?
Yes,
And,
the 14-15 numbers are just shy of 21,000.
so it's 5 to 11 to 21,000 too. And then do we have an idea, given the size of our system, when we're reaching what a stabilization number might be, since these are all new degrees coming online?
Well, it's a great question. We had roughly 100,000 of our students that successfully transferred last year. And I would remind all of you that, to some extent, that ability to transfer to the in-state public universities is dictated by how well they are funded. And so we've seen our transfer numbers, especially in the Great Recession, pretty volatile, because in a couple of semesters, in spring terms, the CSU literally had to stop admitting our students. But our associate degree for transfer numbers are not restrained by the ability of the university systems to accept students, because if they complete the degree, we're able to count them as a success. So it won't surprise me if within the next 5 years you see that number approaching 100,000. Now, where will it ultimately level out? I can't tell you. Roughly 40 to 50% of our students say they are here with us for the purpose of transferring. And so one might assume that ultimately you would see several 100,000 of our students successfully completing those degrees, but it will take some time for that to happen.
But it seems like with the communication and marketing effort too, more and more students are recognizing that is the right pathway, and a student that might not have been in the ADT program a couple years ago are now realizing that's the appropriate pathway that they
That's
need
right.
to be taken. So it's very encouraging and
It is.
exciting to see that. Vice
Yeah.
President Estolano?
I guess I just want to reiterate the point about understand these in absolute numbers. So when we talk about overall completion rates and we compare prepared versus unprepared, I mean, really the bulk of our students are unprepared. So we really need to hone in on that. And the graphs are interesting, but when you're looking at a change in 1/10 or 2/10 of a percentage point, what does that really mean in terms of absolute numbers? That's different for the unprepared, which are 60% or 70% of our students, versus an increase in completion. For prepared students, that's better. 0.2% is an absolute number. We have to look at those numbers, not percentages, because at the end of the day, it's about individual students and human beings. So I think that the presentation was helpful, but I remember a presentation, it must have been my first year on the board, where we really looked at absolute numbers as well. And I would really like to get that data. And looking at things like remedial English, remedial math, again, these are interesting charts, but how many students are affected? I want to be able to say to somebody, 20,000 more people or 200 more people benefited as a result of these investments. And that's what's going to resonate with the legislature and the governor, not really these marginal changes, that if you change the scale of the graph, it makes it look like you're making much more improvement than really you are if you look at the number of human beings benefiting. So I think it's a helpful presentation. There are definitely disappointments in not being able to move the needle in some areas. But we really, as this board, need to get those numbers for the people who constitute the vast majority of the students, which are unprepared, they're students of color, they're underrepresented minorities in professional standing, right? Not underrepresented for the system. We're overrepresented for the system. So those are the numbers that I think would be more useful for our board to help make policy decisions. And I appreciate, but you're right. I don't want to minimize, Chancellor, the fact that you're collecting this data consistently on an annual basis, tracking it by cohort. That is really significant. But we have to dig into the numbers, and I'm hoping for us, I'm not really a data nerd, but I am a metric nerd, and I would like to dig in much more deeply.
We absolutely can, and we'll provide you those numbers. I would remind you that you set the goals, you set percentages, because they are not impacted by our growth or our lack of ability to grow. In the past, the system had set increased numbers, for example, for transfer rates, and they were numbers. And unfortunately, as the system grew, of course the goals were met because the system was getting bigger. And so when you approved the goals in 14, you did that in a way that takes that growth or in the case of a downturn, loss of ability to enroll students out of the equation and requires the system to improve whether the enrollment's going up or going down. Now, having said that, you're absolutely right. For example, when we show, as we did this year or over the past few years, a 4 percentage point improvement in course success rates, and you look at that and you say 66 to 70%, big deal. But when you apply it to the 380,000 course sections we enroll or we offer up and down the state, that 4 percentage points is a huge number, and those are data that you need to be able to articulate the work of the system. But the goals were set so that the system couldn't sort of hide behind growth, that we really had to show that things were getting better, not that the system was just getting bigger.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a
Member
question.
O'Brien?
I have a question about the associate degree for transfer. How many of the students that are getting these ADTs would have transferred otherwise, but just not with the ADT? Is there an increment that is a lot more people are getting ready to transfer as a result of this?
I would suggest to you that virtually 100% of the students that are getting these associate degrees for transfer would have transferred anyway. There are a couple of things that make this program so important. One is that it makes it so much more clear for a student to know what is expected for them to transfer, and that they can transfer to any one of the CSUs that offer that program that's not impacted. In the past, the student used to have to get their transcript evaluated by each and every different institution, and some of them would get credit for some courses at one college and not necessarily for others at another. The other really important aspect of this is that unfortunately many students have their education interrupted, and we know that often a student will transfer from one of our institutions before they get a degree. They get 53, 56, 58 units. That's what they need to transfer to one of the CSUs. They make that transfer and never complete a degree. And then for whatever reason, their life or whatever intervenes and they're unable to complete that bachelor's degree, they have no documentation of ever having completed a college degree. With this associate degree for transfer program, even if something happens to them along the way and they're unable to complete that degree, or let's say it takes them several more years because they have to work and go to school at the same time, in the meantime they have a college degree, a marketable documentation of their progress. So it is important not only to ease transfer, but it's also important to document the work of the students.
Member Belinsky?
Just to add one other comment to what you're saying, the other advantage of the ADT is an other advantage of the ADT once the student is transferred is they can only be held to having to get 60 more units. And that has not always been true in the past. Once they got there, it was like, oh, well, you should have taken this. Why didn't you take this? And they now have these privileges, or whatever you want to call it, of things the CSU must do that they didn't have to do in the past. And that 60-unit upper division is one of those.
Thank you, Member Belansky. I should have mentioned that.
Any other questions or points to make on the State of the System report? Thank
I
you.
do want to acknowledge Alice and her colleagues at TRIS, as well as Teresa Tenna and the institutional effectiveness folks. Again, the fact that this system exists and that you're able to have us report on goals that you set is pretty impressive, and all the credit for that work goes to the people who designed and supported the system. So thank you.
So the board, I believe, just received the presentation, so I'm sure if there are additional questions about the data behind the numbers and the graphs, we'll be able to get that to members of the board. Thank you. Moving on to item 4.2, the strategic plan final report. Chancellor Harris.
Thank you, President Baum, members of the board. You have, I know, because I saw them at your place, this report, and I think you've received it in the mail as well. And I'm not going to take a lot of time to go through this. I do want to call your attention to several things in the report, but it will go by pretty quickly. I'd call your attention first to the cover of the report and remind you that in early in late 2012, you charged us to revise the then existing strategic plan of the system, which we did in 2012. A report or a plan that had been developed several years previously, but the board had never received any progress or update on it. So we did revise that strategic plan, and in early 2013, you approved the strategic plan of the system. And so what you see in front of you is literally the plan that you approved. We've not changed any word in it. What we did instead, in order for you to be able to track it, is we simply inserted our progress on everything in the plan, and that's in red throughout the document. So when you see on the cover, final report to the board, that read what you approved back in 13 was this document without these red writings in it. So I would ask you first to turn to page 3 in the document, which was the table of contents, if you will, of the 35 strategies that you approved the system undertake. And again, if you look in the right-hand part of that, you will see that I have gone in and shown you whether those have been completed, partially completed, or not completed. And I would remind you that embedded in this report at your request was the 22 recommendations of the Student Success Task Force. So, and I'll call those to your attention in a moment, but not only did the 35 strategies get vastly achieved, but as part of that, the 22 recommendations, with one exception, got accomplished as well. So when you look down this page, you'll see we were unable to do B5, C6, and E5, and I'll talk about a couple of those in a moment. But again, the documentation of the work of the colleges and the folks here at the Chancellor's office in doing what you asked them to do is pretty impressive when you look down this list. So if you'll turn your attention to page 16 and 17, I'll try to show you how we structured this document. You'll see, in this case, over in the upper left-hand corner on page 16, strategy A1, which is early awareness of college as a viable option, and then the strategy detailed, including over on the right-hand side on page 17, the specific initiatives that you wanted done. And so what you see in red, for example, under outreach to students and parents, was what the system did and whether or not the system considered that to complete that particular initiative. And so as you track through the report, you can see that for each and every one of the 35 strategies that you authorized. So now I would call your attention over to page 29. And as you heard me mention a moment ago, we embedded the 22 recommendations of the Student Success Task Force in the report as well. And here's the example of where that happened. So if you look on page 29, you will see here is recommendation, Student Success Task Force recommendation 3.4, 5.1, 5.2, and 8.3. And so you see we've reported on each one of those and showed you whether or not they were completed as well. And then finally, I would call your attention to page 36, where you will see an example of one of the 3 strategies that we were unable to accomplish. And again, you will see down at the bottom of the page that initiative and explanation of the fact that we weren't able to do it, and in nice, clear, underlined letters, the fact that it was not completed. So what this document does is show you that the goals that you set in that revision of the strategic plan in 2013 have been largely completed, and this sets the stage for the activity that you will undertake under new leadership beginning later this year to do a new strategic plan for the system. And again, as I mentioned to you before, that's driven first and foremost by the board. The initial part of that process is for the consultants and the leadership of the system to interview each and every one of you individually, and then following that will be a great deal of outreach up and down the state, participation and seeking input not only from the colleges but from the communities that we serve, and ultimately coming back to you with a draft strategic plan. So with that, be happy to try to answer your questions on the strategic plan.
Well, thank you very much. I do want to say one thing. I believe it was about just over 3 years ago that Member Reed, Member Malumed, Member Belinsky, Member Hawkins, and I were with you in the room at that retreat over at the Embassy Suites to kind of review in detail and update this strategic plan. And this kind of dovetails into how you concluded the last report. It's been a hallmark of your leadership to be able to bring to the board tangible responses and document the tangible progress and outcomes for every goal that we've set and every strategic direction that the board has set. And to be able to see this report and be able to document the progress that's been made in such a short period of time has been tremendously fulfilling. And as a board member, it's one of the reasons that has kept me enthusiastic about continuing to serve. Unlike to see how far the system has come and to work with you and your leadership team to chart a path and a roadmap to the future, and then hold ourselves accountable and document how we're doing, and then also recognizing if we are falling short to make adjustments in order to review that has been very important. And I think it's demonstrated not only for our own kind of personal satisfaction about what we're trying to do for the system, but then it's been recognized in the legislature and in the governor's office in a very tangible way through an increased confidence in investment in the system, because and we're yielding the results that the state's been looking for. So I'm very pleased to see the outcomes out of this strategic plan. But I'll open it up to other questions or comments from other members of the board, too, because we're about to embark on this again in the coming months, too. Member Shaw.
Yes, as much as Cecilia loves numbers, I love strategic plans. And it's one thing to come up with goals, but it's another thing to implement them. So I just want to congratulate you and everybody involved and commend you on your leadership in terms of making this happen. I wasn't here 3 years ago, but just to see the results now is extraordinary. So congratulations on this effort.
I have one
Member Reed.
How does this document intertwine with the strategic plan that the individual colleges take upon themselves to do? Is this document, how does that work?
The original strategic plan, I think, was done back in '06, the system plan, and then we updated it in 13. And I can say that the lion's share of the districts use the system strategic plan as the guidepost within which they create their own strategic plan. So I can speak from experience in Los Rios that once the system strategic plan was developed, then that became the backdrop, if you will, for our Los Rios strategic plan, and you'll find that in colleges up and down the state. Now, one of the things in the previous report on the outcomes on the cohort measurement you saw was that the colleges are directed to set local goals toward those improvements. And this coming year is the first year they really will have had time to do that. And so I think you're going to see more and more relationship between those local strategic plans and the direction you set at the state level. These districts are still locally controlled, but if we're going to meet system-wide goals that you have set, we can only do that if the colleges are driving toward those same goals. Now, one of the things you'll see is that you'll see differing emphasis on differing goals depending on the institution. So, for example, Los Angeles Trade Tech as a college is going to be more focused on the CTE goals than, say, American River College might be here in Sacramento, that's more focused on the transfer goals, because each of our institutions has different student makeup and different priorities from their mission. But you set goals for the entire system, and so to answer your question, in best practice, we should see the goals that you set reflected in the strategic plans of the local districts. The last thing I would tell you is that later this month, we will be reporting on the student success goals to an informational hearing in the Senate. That's correct. And then we also are in the process of scheduling an update date on the system goals for the staff of the legislature and the governor's office and the Department of Finance. So we wanted to bring that material forward to you first, but by the end of January, we should have informed the folks up the street as well. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. I hope we continue to have the benefit of your wisdom about not only where we fell short and where we need to work going forward, but as we look at the next strategic plan, where may we have even been more ambitious than we might have been in the past? Where could we have, where's our moonshot if we want to start thinking about that we should, as we prepare for that next process too?
Well, without going into a lot of details, you've already set one of those goals with your workforce task force. You've made it crystal clear to the system that basic skills and equity are a priority. So those are probably three really outstanding ways to begin that conversation.
Right. Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you.
And as I hinted before, the response to the system report and then our commitment and adherence to the strategic plan has yielded, has been recognized by our partners over at the Capitol. And so I want to go to the next item on the governor's 2016-2017 budget proposal. And so I turn it back over to the Chancellor to introduce this item.
Thank you, President Brown, members of the board. As you know, Governor Brown released just a couple of weeks ago his January budget message, and Dan is going to give you some detail on that. I would remind all of us that the legislature certainly will weigh in on the financial priorities for the state, and they will make some modifications in the budget over the next few months. And then, of course, we'll hear the governor report in May on a revision of his January budget. But the truth is that having been in California, like many of you, for a number of years, the governor's January budget often is a very clear precursor to what we will see ultimately approved by the legislature. They will make some modifications, but the governor's January budget is a pretty clear roadmap for where we're likely to end up. So with that, I'm going to ask Vice Chancellor Troy to give you a bit of background, and let me, before I do that, thank him and his staff. I will tell you that this is developed by the governor and the governor's staff, but we work very hard to try to help inform that process so that it comes out in concert with your priorities. And Dan's heads that up. Dan?
Thank you, Chancellor Harris, President Baum, members of the board. I will be working off this document, which I believe you have at your desk, item 4.3. And I am going to start on page 2 of that document if you'd like to follow along. So as Chancellor Harris mentioned, about 2 weeks ago, the governor released his budget proposal for the 16-17 year. Very good news, by and large, is included in this proposal. Revenues for the state, general fund revenues, are up to $124 billion. To put some perspective on that, at the worst point in the recession, the state was down to $82 billion. So that's quite a climb up in 6 short years. Certainly, thanks to the voters for approval of Prop 30, certainly play a significant role in that, as well as an improving economy. The governor, however, who's not a man of, as you know, of irrational exuberance, does spend quite a bit of time in his summary and at his press conference expressing a lot of caution that the state has seen a lot of boom and bust over time. We're heavily dependent on capital gains revenues, which are highly volatile. About 100 people in Silicon Valley have a lot of influence over how good our budgets are, and he spends a lot of time talking about that. With that, you'll see this is a budget with significant increases in it, but also a lot of caution in it. Indeed, in terms of the overall budget, he chooses to put $2 billion into the rainy day fund, more than what was required by the provisions of that fund. So there's a lot of folks, particularly outside the realm of public education, that would like to see more of that spent. The governor's chooses to be very cautious, so you see that there's some battle lines may be drawn among advocates and the governor and the legislature and the governor in the coming months. Turning to Proposition 98, There's an increase over the 15-16 budget overall for K-14 education of about 4.7%. It goes from $68.4 billion to $71.6 billion. Again, that's on top of very significant increases we've received in recent years, including about 12% in the current budget year. In the higher education section of the budget, the governor does focus on some key priorities, and you'll see those played out in some of his proposals for the community colleges. There's a big emphasis on student success and program completion, something this board has put a lot of attention into, of course, over the last several years. The use of technology to improve efficiency and student outcomes, and overall a proposal to, an impetus, I should say, on improving time to degree. In terms of the college highlights, I won't mention all of them. I'll go through some of the larger and more significant issues. We do receive funding for access of about $115 million. That would be enough to fund about 50,000 new students by head count, so that was a high priority of the board. We're happy to see that funded. The COLA is estimated by the governor to be a little less than 0.5%. That is a very low inflationary adjustment, particularly coming on the heels of the LAO's report in November, where they estimated almost 2%. So there's been a lot of questions about why things would change so much in that time frame. The feedback we're getting is that in the recent months, we've seen a decline somewhat in the stock market. We've seen a slowdown in China, and also the gas prices have come down quite a bit in that time. And some of the word I'm receiving from the LAO is that they think that the ultimate number may be a little bit closer to the governor's number than what they estimated in November. More to come on that. We were very, very pleased to see a high priority of the board funded. That $200 million is proposed to enhance workforce. Details of the allocations will be coming later this month, so we'll need to take a closer look at that. But this is exactly the amount that the board requested in the system budget request in September. Clearly, the governor's making this a high priority, and we're very pleased to see that going forward. Basic skills, again, another priority request of the board in September is funded here. We asked for a $20 million increase to the existing categorical, which would bring the total categorical up to about $40 million. The governor goes up to $50 million. He puts $30 million in there for an ongoing increase. Note with that comes along with a reform of how the allocations are done. And this is meant to dovetail with the one-time money we received in the 15-16 budget. You may recall we got $60 million one time to help districts implement research-based programs in their basic skills operations. This ongoing program is meant to reinforce those research-based activities and help districts further implement those successful programs. There is a large amount of money for deferred maintenance and instructional equipment proposed in the budget, almost $290 million. Of that amount, $255 million is from ongoing resources. So I think a lot of people will have their eyes on that money. They will see that some of those resources can be diverted for other purposes. I think this is certainly intentional on the part of the governor. I mentioned the caution earlier. He's concerned about Prop 98 as well. He's concerned about putting too much revenue into the base, which might have to be pulled back if we hit a recession a couple of years down the line. So I think the governor is trying to intentionally build in a cushion in the Prop 98 budget. Institutional effectiveness, I'll skip ahead to that. A $10 million increase is proposed for that. That would bring the program up to about $27 million. The governor would like to see expanded efforts in terms of local technical assistance, what we call the PRT teams that go out to locals to address their local needs, and an additional $8 million for professional development activities and best practices. Innovation awards. This is an item that was funded in the budget 2 years ago, not this past year, but it's been a high priority of the governor in his budget discussions with the legislature. More detail is to come on this when the trailer bill comes out later this month, but it's our understanding this is meant to be incentive awards for districts that have new ideas they want to implement to help push improve time to degree and student success. So it'll be a grant-based program. Again, more detail will come on that later in the month. The other initiative that the governor pushes is the zero textbook cost degree, which I'll admit is something I'd never heard of until January 7th. This has apparently been, this is an effort to increase the amount of OER, the Open Education Resources degrees that are available to our students. A similar program was initiated in Virginia, is my understanding. So basically, this will be incentive money for districts who wish to have degrees that have no textbook costs for students. And the governor's intent is to tie them very closely to the SB 1440 degrees. Some other good news in the budget: no fee increases are proposed. We're very happy to see that for sure. And also, no cuts are proposed. No cuts to existing categorical programs. I'll go over one more item before I get to what's not in the budget. We do have a considerable amount of one-time funding available in the budget. So this is settle up of the guarantee. The Proposition 98 guarantee is a little bit higher than what was estimated at the time the current budget was passed. So to true that up, some one-time money is provided to districts in the form of mandate reimbursement. So this will go out to districts per FTES for local discretionary purposes. So I've told you what's in the budget, what's not in the budget. We had asked for base funding increase. We have colleges are facing significant obligations in the coming years as PERS and STIRS employer contributions grow. That's effectively a negative COLA for districts. So we have argued that districts need resources, discretionary resources, in order to meet those needs as they come forward, and also to help account for the zero COLAs that colleges received during the recession. That would help ease some of the pressure on local budgets. So that's an area that we'll be looking toward over the next coming months before we get a final budget. Another important to the board that was not funded was additional funding to hire full-time faculty. We asked for $80 million. We did not receive any funding for that in the budget. And also we asked for backfill of certain categorical programs, including the part-time faculty support items and CalWorks. The governor has traditionally not been interested in backfilling those old categorical programs. He prefers different approaches for student support, such as the student equity plans, the triple SP program, and otherwise. So we're not surprised he hasn't funded that, but that's certainly something you'll hear from our advocates over the next several months. Looking ahead, as I mentioned, there are some notes of caution going forward. I mentioned the PERS and STIRS obligations. When those are fully implemented, they phase in very quickly over the next few years. That will result in new cost obligations to districts, just from the increases to this, of well over $400 million. So that is essentially a cut to the budget if they're not provided with funding to support that. So that is part of the reason that we continue to ask for general purpose discretionary funding in district budgets. We also note that Prop 30 is starting to come to an end at the end of the 2016 year, at the end of this year. The sales tax provision of Prop 30 goes away, and 2 years later, the income tax provisions go away. There is, as you may know, an attempt by some advocates, particularly union advocates, to push a measure on this November ballot that would extend the income tax provisions of Prop 30, but not the sales tax provisions. So there's no proposal on the table to extend the sales tax. Also, as Chancellor Harris mentioned, this is just the first step in the process. This is the governor's initial view of the revenues in the budget. It's his take on how to spend all of them and his alone. Coming steps will be there'll be an analysis by the Legislative Analyst Office. The legislative committees will have their take on the budget, and of course, when we get to May revision, we'll have a whole new set of revenue projections, which could be different from what we see today. So we'll tune in to then to check that out. Also, at the end of your item, I do include a table. This is not an exhaustive table of every item funded in the budget, but it's primarily the highlights of what is funded, including the items asked for in the system budget request that may or may not have been funded in this budget. So I thought that would be useful for the board to review as they consider the budget. With that, I'll ask for any of your questions.
In addition to board member comments or questions, I believe we have members of the public who wish to address the board. So if board members don't mind, we'll go to public comment first.
Okay, we have, oh, sorry. We have David Morse, followed by Jonathan Lightman and Richard Hansen.
President Baum, Chancellor, and board members. So obviously, there's a lot of good in the budget. There are a couple of comments that I would like to make. One thing that was included in the system's budget request that did not survive the governor's pen was funding for the hiring of full-time faculty, again this year as we had last year. We had the $62 million last year, and we had asked for, I think, a larger amount, and it didn't make it through. I hope that we will continue to lobby for that funding. The importance of full-time faculty is something that's been discussed many times here. And at this point, the Academic Senate is working with TWE, WIN, and with the Chancellor's Office in a number of different ways through providing EEO summits and other programs to try to address the longstanding issue of hiring faculty who are really capable of working with our diverse body of students. We need to be able to hire in order to actually address that. So for the importance of the diversity of our students and serving those students, getting that funding back in is something that we hope we will be able to push very hard for. We also last year had requested an augmentation in funding for the Academic Senate for the work that we do for you and for the system, and we made that one through the legislature and all the way to the governor, and then that one didn't survive last year, so I'm urging Vice Chancellor Troy to give it another shot because we could very much use that funding. And the final thing, the zero-cost textbook degrees, we had heard of them actually previously, and in fact, at our executive committee meeting last week, the Academic Senate formed a task force to work in cooperation with the Community College League and with the Student Senate to look at what we can do as a system in terms of open educational resources to lower student costs in general, and looking at the Z degrees and what we can realistically do with those in particular. So we're on that one, and we will be trying to move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Jonathan Lightman, followed by Richard Hansen.
Good afternoon, President Baum, Chancellor Harris, and members of the Board of Governors, and Happy New Year to you all. I think this is budget number 17 that I'm presenting in front of you, and of course, we are grateful to the governor for what he is offering, and at the same time, it's incumbent upon this body to examine our request list, because that is a very important statement of values. And as you heard from Academic Senate President Morse, the issue of the full-time faculty, of course, was a high priority for the system, as is the support for part-time faculty and the increase to our base funding, because the districts are using that to cover increased cost in PERS and STIRS. I think that we have a very good and perhaps unique opportunity, knowing that there may be some wiggle room in the budget, knowing that there is an abundance of caution from this governor in anticipation of a further decline, to connect the dots for him in a way that perhaps we don't do when we submit our BCP. In other words, when we do submit our BCP, we're submitting our laundry list. These are the things that we're looking for. But now that we have the governor's document and we have a statement of priorities of this board, which are going to be reflected in a strategic plan, and I thought that Member Reed's question about the connection between our strategic plan here at this level and what the colleges are doing is very salient for this discussion. Because if we are able to connect those dots and to say how an increase in full-time faculty, how support for part-time faculty, how an increase to base funding also supports things like the workforce task force, like student success, like basic skills, then we can weave those priorities into what the governor wants to see and perhaps set up a more favorable conversation for May. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Hansen, please.
Good afternoon. I'm here to represent the California Community College Independents. They're the unaffiliated faculty unions in the state. And I support my colleagues' comments. You note that it's all of us faculty coming up to approach you and make our kind of arguments that we hope you will carry forward. Because I do agree with the Chancellor's comments. The governor tends to get what he proposed. So I don't have any answers for you about how to build that argument. I think Jonathan just gave you some suggestions. I have a few points along those same lines. I think the big problem, as much as we're getting additional funding once again, is the lack of base funding. We do have the 16% plus loss of purchasing power during the recession. I heard a news report, maybe not well-founded, but it talked about how the governor's budget hopes to really advance California in its per-student funding for K-12. We're down the bottom. I think we're 47th in the country, but they expect out of this budget to have a big leap up in that ranking. Well, for us, we're going to be still at the same level, and we have the same issues. We will just slip farther behind because, we're behind UC, CSU, K-12. We're at the bottom. So in that vein, I would say that during recessionary times, we often say that we're asked to do more with less. I think actually during this major recession, it was different. We actually had some enrollment not only declines, but workload reductions to compensate for our lower funding levels. I'd say, however, today, what we're not being asked to do more with less, we're asked to do more with more. Because so much of this funding, and we all are behind these programs, the latest one for workforce, but also the Student Success Initiative, and also the Equity Plan. All of those ask us to do more. The money is targeted to certain goals, but the infrastructure on our colleges are already in a decimated state. And so those are the support networks for those new programs. So it's not just the new part kind of on its own being funded and then flying along handily. Everybody else on campus has to be doing their part. So maybe you can carry some of that back to the governor and maybe have some success. I would echo the full-time faculty issue and the part-time categoricals only to say that on the budget call that we had with the Department of Finance, we heard the same thing about the full-time faculty issue.
15 seconds.
The CTE money could be used for that. Well, we heard that about student success and equity money, but as I think the Chancellor pointed out, the districts are hesitant to use the money in that way. I think it's going to be the same with the CTA money. Thank you very much.
That concludes public comment.
We'll now open it up to board questions or comments. Member Sumner?
I'm not sure if this falls under with Vincent or with you regarding veterans issues with veteran resource centers, because when you look through all the documentation, we have 69 colleges, and we have 113 colleges and only 69 resource centers. There's over 70,000 veterans, and that's guaranteed money that comes into the state of California. So we have over 70,000 students that brings guaranteed money, but we need to get more resources for, I think, those veterans. Back at the colleges, I know that in the Southern, there's more students, less than Northern. I know some colleges are different. But I know when I go out to the colleges, I'm constantly being approached saying, we don't have the support, they don't have the training, they don't have the certifying officials. I know that there's been a couple of senators that have been trying to put stuff forward. I know Senator Roth, I believe. And the reason I bring this up is I recently spoke in Irvine, and I had a lot of students that came up to me and approached me afterwards. And more when you meet the faces, they need the support. Why isn't there money out there for just veterans issues on colleges? Because I'm talking, this is guaranteed. We're not asking for money. If we do more, and its own numbers are only going to increase as the downsizing and as veterans are doing in the community colleges. I would just love to see us maybe try to push something more forward coming from the Board of Governors, and 70,000, and it's going to maybe even double up to it. It's going to increase. And every time I read these, I see we do the tuition, and all those things, but what about the resource centers? Because it educates the teachers. It educates the teachers how to deal with Title V students, with Title V issues. A lot of these veterans coming back have issues. So why can't somehow this board encompass that, being California has one of the largest of colleges and veterans? So why don't we do more?
Chancellor, or,
Well, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we've had a real challenge with this administration over the past number of years is they simply don't like categorical funding. And I think there's a good reason for that. And so I think what we need to do is be creative in the way we address opportunities like this. And I think it's our responsibility to be much more communicative to our colleges about their responsibility to serve veterans. And those colleges, the 69 of 113, certainly have gotten that message. We need to speak out to the others. I think Governor Brown, the administration, and the legislature believe that the more bifurcated they make our funding, the harder it is for us to get done what needs to be done. And you know, generally, we don't disagree with that. So Dan's earlier point about a need for restoring the base, and some of the folks who testified underscored that, that's where the money comes from for program expansion, unless it's categorically driven.
Member Malumed?
I think that's a great question, and I was just kind of thinking, with us going back to DC in February, that might be a potential ask for our system. We have a lot of our U.S. representatives I know who are on the Veterans Committees, so I was just thinking of potential sources there. Two kinds of questions. So on here, it talks about under the CTE pathways on page 2, you know, the governor's intent is to repeal the sunset date for this program and to make it permanent. Do you mean permanent forever? That would be great. And then it also says on some of them from ongoing resources. Is that forever, or is that just for this year? I'm a little unclear about permanent and ongoing resources.
Sure. In terms of your first question about the SB 1070 program, yeah, there is a language in statute that had a sunset date for that, so the program would literally have gone away this year. The governor's proposing to get rid of that sunset date, so there's no end to the program. Now, having said that, every year it's a choice in the Budget Act of what to fund or what not to fund, regardless of whether the statute says we can fund it. So that's always subject to the annual budget process. And as to your second question, ongoing resources, I'm trying to make a distinction between dollars that are there only one time, such as the settle up for prior years, the Proposition 98 guarantee for prior years. You would not want to take one-time resources and use it for salaries because you don't have an ongoing basis to support that salary increase.
Okay.
So when I note that a lot of the deferred maintenance, for example, that's essentially a one-time expenditure done with ongoing resources. Folks that would like to see certain other areas of the budget addressed here will probably look at that, because that is an ongoing use. You could put a permanent increase in an area there and have that continue.
Okay, and then really my second question was, there was a year where Governor Schwarzenegger decreased the fees, much to our surprise. With our baccalaureate degrees, is the governor able to decrease our baccalaureate fees? I mean, they can decrease our fees for our usual community college students. Can he decrease those fees? Just a question, I don't know.
Could he? I don't think there's any reason why he couldn't propose a change to the statute to allow that to happen. I think I would be hesitant to do that if there were not a funding source provided to those colleges to help them fund those additional costs that come with the upper division work, because those additional fees are the only funding resource for the colleges at this point.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you.
Member Shaw?
Yes. Two questions really about infrastructure, the administrative infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. So, and again, remember, I'm new. So my question is, what's the rationale for not funding the $80 million for faculty?
I think the governor is again, the only discretionary funding he put in the budget was for the cost of living adjustment, which is about $29 million. So I think his concern is that he does not want to provide ongoing base funding to districts in the fear that a year or two down the line, when we hit a recession or Prop 30 goes away, that he'll have to pull it back out. I think that is informing his choices in the budget. That's why he's putting a lot of money into deferred maintenance as opposed to a base funding increase or 2 full-time faculty. And again, that's not to say that we wouldn't like to see some of those things funded, but I think that's what the governor is thinking.
But based upon what the gentleman said earlier, he said he was trying to deal with more and more, but really he has less and he's dealing with more. And so what's the thinking in funding this but not giving the administrative capacity to deal with the funding?
Well, I agree.
While the money's there,
That's right.
while we're abundant.
I think it's our belief that districts do need additional discretionary resources. And that is one thing that we will be advocating for in the budget. And I think there's a whole host of reasons for it. I think there are the programmatic reasons that some of our public commenters brought up earlier. I think when you look at the PERS and STRS obligations coming ahead, I think when you look at the differences in how classrooms differ today than they did 20, 30 years ago. There's much more information technology involved in the classes. They look very different than what they did. Those costs for base expenditures are much different and higher than they used to be.
Okay.
So I'd like to see that acknowledged in the budget as you do.
Thank you. Now, in terms of the physical infrastructure, we've had conversations about this before. The maintenance money, again, is that money is competitive, is that correct? The colleges compete for this?
Well, not for the deferred maintenance money. I think
No?
you're thinking of the facilities bond money. That's a little
Right.
bit different.
I know that's, okay, so.
Yeah, that is competitive. The deferred maintenance, there were certainly priorities that colleges have to meet to get that, but that will essentially go out to colleges per FTES, though the priorities have to be specified.
So there's no competition?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Member Hawkins?
Thank you. Dan, to the extent possible, with some of these huge numbers here, how much of this community college budget is ongoing and how much is considered one-time? Can you give me kind of ballpark grand totals for each area?
You bet. About $400 million is ongoing, and about $300 million is one-time.
Okay. And currently, that augmentation for the mandate reimbursements, all 72 districts will play in that arena equally?
Yes.
Or is there any talk about changing how that would be allocated?
The governor's proposal right now is per FTS, so it'll be essentially proportionate to all districts.
Thank you.
Member Reed?
I believe it was the Sacramento Bee this morning, maybe Dan Walters, that addressed the issue of the budget proposal. And he talks about had the unfunded liability of the pension plans been included in the budget, that in fact, instead of having a surplus, we might be facing as much as an $11 billion deficit. And what concerns me is, from my understanding, that as we go forward, like on STRS, that in the next couple of years, the employer contribution rates are going to be in excess of 19% of the employee salaries. And these small colleges that we have, when you spoke about impacting the COLA for the faculty, I think it's going to go a lot further. It could potentially go a lot further than just the COLA and into their operating budgets because of the lack of funding. And do you think the legislature has any wherewithal or interest in addressing this unfunded liability issue? Because it's such a big number.
Yeah, well, we were successful in the 15-16 year, this current year budget, in getting about $267 million to increase the base budget for very much the reason you're describing, the STRS employer contribution increase and also the PERS increase that are going up in time, and that's what you were referencing in the Dan Walters column. So I think it's going to be a key part of our advocacy strategy going forward to try to convince the governor and the legislature that we do need a little more resources for that.
Member Hawkins, did you have something quick?
Dan, the one thing I forgot, but Member Reed jarred my memory. Are we making any system-wide effort to address the Cadillac tax that the districts are going to have to be facing when that part of ACA kicks in. I'm just curious because that's not in the same magnitude as STRS and PERS. But in some districts, that's going to be between $1 and $2 million that has to come out of general operating funds. So I was wondering if we shouldn't be kind of focusing on that as well.
Yeah, no, that is certainly another issue that we're talking about. So what Member Hawkins is talking about is increased costs to districts relative to the ACA, the Obamacare. So that's yet another discretionary cost that is on the district ledgers, and I think, again, that's another reason for why we're asking for base increases.
Member Campbell?
Okay, I'm not sure if this is a question for you or Vince, but I'm just thinking or wondering, down the road, do we have any idea of what's going to happen after Prop 30 actually sunsets? Are we just hoping that the economy is back up to past performance?
Do keep in mind that the governor's proposal here does, for the 16-17 year, does take into account the loss of some of those taxes as the sales tax phases out this year. So I think the Governor Brown would say, yeah, I've accounted for that in the budget. Now, as you go forward, particularly beginning in 18-19 when those income taxes go down, and that is really the major portion of Prop 30, about 80% of those revenues are in the income tax provisions. That could hit colleges and the state very, very hard, particularly if it comes at the same time as a recession comes. If you listen to many economists, we're overdue for a recession. So we could be in for a pretty severe double dip down the road if those issues are not addressed going forward. Yeah.
Member Epstein?
Yeah, being in the business I'm in, I'm quite familiar with that Cadillac tax. I just wanted to make an observation. The federal government did suspend it for 2 years, so if it takes place ever again, it'll be in 2020, and all the current candidates for president have said they want to repeal it. So I think it's more likely than not that will never be implemented.
Member Perry?
Does the money allocated for the Cal Grant, does it meet the need sufficiently, or where's the gap there?
That is, this is a special program for students that are already received the Cal Grant B Award and who also take 12 units or more per term. So this is not literally a Cal Grant expenditure. It's supposed to be a Cal Grant supplement and incentive for districts to go, students to go full time. So that's what it's intended to do. So you could up the amount and then give students more per student, but it's intended to help meet their other costs that go along with attending college other than tuition and fees. I believe we estimate it comes out to about $800 per student.
Well, thank you very much for that Member Avalos, please.
Yep, sorry. So my question is regarding the Innovation Awards. So is that specific to community colleges, or is it part of a joint CSU-UC as well?
For this proposal, it's only for community colleges.
It's only for community colleges. And then the next one is zero textbook cost. So do you have a sense of what's the thought process here? I mean,
I think it's part of the governor's interest in making, in realizing cost efficiencies in higher education. There's been a lot of demand within the legislature to make Cal Grants more accessible and more generous to students, and I think the governor's response to that is saying, you know what, we have to make sure that we're containing costs in higher education before we go there. So we see proposals such as innovations, we see the zero textbook costs, we see that he's not increased fees in several years. So I think this is very much that approach.
okay, good, thanks.
Hey, thank you very much. And with that, we are going to take a short break. I hope you can, we are going to be back at 3 o'clock.
I've told folks that we need to be